My daughter handed gifts to everyone but me at Christmas dinner, so I made her credit card decline. Christmas dinner took place at my daughter's lavish penthouse, overlooking the glittering Manhattan skyline. Amidst laughter and stories of ski trips to Aspen and multi-million-dollar deals, Jessa began handing out presents. Gift after gift, exquisitely wrapped, were handed out to her friends and husband, but my chair remained empty. Finally, a friend, a little tipsy, asked, "Jessa, don't you have anything for your dad?" Jessa laughed, a laugh too loud, too shrill. "Oh, my dad?" she said, her tone cloyingly sweet. "He doesn't need presents, he pays for them. Isn't that the greatest gift of all?" Silence fell over the table. Then she looked straight at me, her eyes challenging. "Your philosophy is experience over things, isn't it? I bet 99% of you will hear this, sigh, and scroll past without clicking like or subscribe, even if it only takes a second. What time is it for you, and where are you listening?" The elevator opened directly into the apartment, a silent ascent culminating in a sudden burst of warmth, light, and the low thrum of sophisticated chatter. One moment, I was in a sterile, mirrored box. The next, I was standing on the precipice of my daughter's life, a world I had paid for, but one in which I was merely a tourist. The scent of pine from a ridiculously large Christmas tree mingled with the expensive perfume of Jessa's friends and the aroma of roasted duck wafting from the open-plan kitchen. "Dad, you made it!" Jessa detached herself from a circle of people, all of them sleek and polished like river stones. She kissed the air beside my cheek, a perfect mannequin's gesture. "Tom, look, Dad's here." Saying they in the eye, Tom, my son-in-law, glided over, a flute of champagne in his hand, his smile as bright and hard as the city lights twinkling through the floor to ceiling windows behind him. "Robert, good to see you. Merry Christmas. Can I get you a drink?" "Just the water for now. Thanks, Tom," I said, handing Jessa the gift I'd brought. It was a first edition of The Beautiful and Damned, bound in dark green leather. My late wife, Laura, had loved Fitzgerald. I thought it might be a way to connect, a small bridge to the past, to a time when our family felt less like a business transaction. "Oh, thank you," Jessa said, her eyes flicking over the carefully wrapped package before placing it on the marble-topped console table, already groaning under the weight of glossy boxes from brands I only knew from the credit card statements: Cartier, Hermes, Chanel. My book looked small and somber beside them, an academic at a rave. I spent the next hour nursing my water, a quiet island in a sea of effervescent conversation. I listened to snippets about a ski trip to Aspen, a new gallery opening in Chelsea, a deal Tom had closed that was apparently paradigm shifting. These were the architects of the new world, and I was just the old bricklayer who'd poured the foundation. They spoke a language of acquisitions and experiences I had founded but never shared. Jessa, my Jessa, moved among them with an effortless grace, her laughter a carefully curated melody. It was a performance, a brilliant one, and I had the uncomfortable feeling of being the sole audience member who knew it was all an act. I had sponsored this perfect play, yet I felt like an uninvited guest who had stumbled backstage. Dinner was an elaborate affair at a long, candlelit table. The food was exquisite, the wine flowed freely, and the conversation hummed along, a symphony of success. I sat near the end, a quiet observer. Across from me was Susan, one of Jessa's older friends, a lawyer with kind, intelligent eyes. We'd met a few times over the years, and she always made a point of speaking to me, a gesture of inclusivity that felt both welcome and slightly pitying. After the main course, Jessa clapped her hands together, a signal for the next act to begin. "Presents," she announced, her voice bright with practiced cheer. She and Tom disappeared for a moment and returned with their arms laden with beautifully wrapped gifts. Jessa, the gracious host, moved around the table, bestowing a carefully chosen item upon each guest. There was a silk scarf for one friend, a vintage watch for another, a limited edition art book for a third. Each gift was met with oohs and ahs, a chorus of appreciation for her impeccable taste and generosity. Finally, she reached Tom. "For my love," she said, handing him a flat orange box, who always supports my big dreams. He opened it to reveal a sleek leather briefcase. It was a perfect prop for the life they were building. She continued down the table, her movements fluid, her smile unwavering. She handed the gift to the woman sitting to my right, then to the man on my left, and then she paused. For a fraction of a second, her eyes met mine. I saw a flicker of something defiance, perhaps, or a cold, hard decision. She turned away, moving to the next person as if my chair were empty, as if I were a ghost at the feast. She started a new conversation, her voice animated, leaving a void where my gift should have been. The empty space on the table in front of me felt vast, a chasm that had opened up between us. The chatter around the table faltered. It was a small thing, a social hiccup, but in this room, where every detail was so meticulously managed, it was a thunderclap. It was Sarah, a younger friend of Jessa's, flush with wine and festive spirit, who broke the silence. Jessa, she slurred slightly. Don't you have anything for your dad? Jessa laughed, a sound that was a little too loud, too bright. Oh, my dad? She trilled, turning to the table as if letting them in on a charming family secret. His greatest gift is being here with us. Besides, she added, her eyes finding mine again, a challenge in them. His philosophy is experiences over things, right, Dad? The words hit me with the force of a physical blow. Experiences over things. It was what Laura used to say, her gentle mantra when we were young and saving every penny to build the business that would one day fund this very penthouse. Laura, who had turned a small inheritance from her mother into an empire, had believed in the richness of a shared life, not the glitter of accumulated possessions. Jessa had taken that beautiful sentiment, that legacy of love and sacrifice, and twisted it into a weapon, an excuse for her own profound ingratitude. It was the sound of someone trying to paper over a deep, structural crack in the foundation of our family. As Jessa brushed past me as if I were air, an awkward silence fell over the table. I saw Susan's pitying gaze from across the table. But it wasn't pity I felt. It was clarity, a cold clarity. The game was up. For years, I had held on, pouring money into her life as a desperate attempt to maintain a connection, a promise I'd made to a dying Laura to always take care of our girl. I feared that if I cut the cord, I would lose her completely. But in that moment, in the reflection of the candlelight on the polished silver, I realized she was already gone. I had lost her long ago. My love hadn't been blind. It had just been far too patient. The drive home was a silent, steely gray affair, the lights of the city smearing across the rain-slicked windshield. The manufactured warmth of Jessa's penthouse had evaporated the moment the elevator doors closed, leaving behind the chill of that empty chair. There was no rage, not anymore. That had burned out on the FDR drive, leaving behind something harder, more resolute. My apartment, unlike Jessa's, was a space of quiet order. Books on history and finance lined the walls, their spines a testament to a life built on substance, not style. It was a stark contrast to the glittering, hollow world I had just left. I didn't turn on the television or pour myself a scotch. Instead, I went through a familiar ritual, one I hadn't performed in months but had kept in reserve, like a fire extinguisher behind a pane of glass. I made a cup of Earl Grey tea, the steam fogging my glasses as I carried it into my home office. I sat down at my desk, the worn leather of my chair a familiar comfort. With a few clicks, I opened an encrypted Excel file named Family Legacy. It was a bland title for a devastating document. The screen glowed, illuminating a series of spreadsheets I had meticulously maintained for the last 5 years. The first tab was labeled Support. I scrolled through the entries, each line a monument to my own foolish patience. Here, I murmured to the empty room, my finger tracing the line on the screen. $15,000 a month, wired on the first into the Jessa Miller family support account. This was the money she told her friends was a trust fund from her grandfather. A grandfather who had died with nothing but a good name and a collection of well-read paperbacks. The lie was her own invention, a piece of fiction to elevate her status. I had allowed it, believing it was a harmless vanity. I clicked over to the next tab, AMXJG. The American Express account I had co-signed for when she'd graduated, a tool I thought would help her build a credit history. Now, it was a ledger of her deceit. The statement was a tapestry of extravagance, very flawless. 5,004 Hamburger Bergdorfs, I read, my voice flat. 5,004 Hamburger Bergdorfs, I read, my voice flat. 8,000 for weekend in street. Bart's. I remembered her posting photos of that trip on Instagram. The caption thanking a luxury hotel for the sponsorship. Lies upon lies. Each one a small, sharp betrayal. She wasn't just spending my money. She was erasing me from the narrative, recasting my sacrifice as a corporate perk. This was the part I knew, the part that had been slowly hardening my heart for years. But I had always suspected there was more. You don't maintain a life that glossy, even on my generous allowance, without other sources of fuel. Tonight, I was going to find them. I navigated to a secure portal, one I had access to for a single, legally sound reason. I was the guarantor on the lease for that multi-million-dollar penthouse. It was a clause I had insisted upon, a financial tether that gave me the right to monitor her creditworthiness to protect my own exposure. It was a measure of self-preservation I had hoped I would never have to use. The credit report loaded, a stark document of black and white data. And there it was, laid bare in the unemotional language of banks and lenders. The American Express card was there, as expected. But beneath it were two other accounts I didn't recognize. A Visa from one major bank, with a credit limit of $75,000. The balance, $74,892.14. Another Visa from a different issuer, limit $60,000. Balance, $59,112.80. Both were in her name alone. Both were stretched to their absolute breaking point. A cold wave washed over me. The scale of it was breathtaking. But the final entry was the one that made my breath catch in my throat. A personal loan issued 6 months ago from a high-interest online lender, the kind that preys on the desperate. The original amount was $50,000. With the exorbitant interest, the outstanding balance was now nearly $65,000. For what? I whispered, the question hanging in the quiet room. The numbers swam before my eyes. To pay for Tom's startup? That ridiculous app that was supposed to revolutionize the art world? To buy more props for their perfect little play? The anger I thought was gone surged back hot and acidic. This wasn't just ingratitude. This was a level of recklessness that bordered on self-destruction. She was drowning, and instead of asking for a life raft, she was ordering champagne for the entire ship. My fingers flew across the calculator keypad, my movements precise, like an auditor finalizing a fraud report. My support, the Amex I paid off, that was one thing. This was another universe of debt, a secret world of financial desperation. I looked at the total debt, $250,000, not including what I had given. She wasn't just living off me. She was building a sandcastle, and the tide was coming in. And I, her ignored father, was holding the tide chart. My anger receded, replaced by a surgical coldness. My daughter had a sickness, a deep rot of image and ego, and it was going to destroy her. I couldn't cure her, but I could stop funding the disease. My gaze drifted to the digital calendar on my screen. It was almost November. My eyes scanned the weeks past Thanksgiving and landed on the day after. Friday, November 29th. Black Friday. The high holy day of American consumerism. The perfect stage for a public lesson in consequences. A plan began to form, not born of anger, but of a terrible, painful clarity. The performance was over. It was time to strike the set. Thanksgiving had been a performance of effortless elegance. A heritage turkey, pre-ordered and perfectly roasted by a high-end caterer, had been the centerpiece of a meal for two. Jessa and Tom had sat at one end of their long, marble-topped dining table, raising glasses of ridiculously expensive Pinot Noir to a life they both felt they had earned. The cleanup was non-existent, whisked away by the same service that had delivered the meal. Now, with Tom having retreated to his study to network, a euphemism for playing a graphically violent video game with his college friends, Jessa was finally in her element, nestled in the pristine, creamy expanse of her white velvet sofa. This was her sanctuary, her command center. The air was still and warm, scented with the last vestiges of cinnamon and clove from a diptyque candle. Outside, the lights of the city glittered like a carpet of fallen stars, a view that cost more per month than most people earned in a year. On the low-slung marble coffee table beside her, a flute of Veuve Clicquot sent a lazy thread of bubbles toward the ceiling. Her laptop was open, it screened a portal to her true passion. The glowing homepages of Saks Fifth Avenue, Net-a-Porter, and Bergdorf Goodman were her sacred texts. This wasn't just a holiday. This was the eve of the high holy day, the Super Bowl of strategic acquisition, Black Friday. To an outsider, the apartment was a masterpiece of minimalist calm, but to a trained eye, it showed the subtle tales of a deep and abiding obsession. Behind a perfectly placed Eames lounge chair, a teetering, sculptural stack of empty designer shopping boxes. Hermes orange, Chanel black, Cartier red was arranged not as clutter, but as a shrine to past victories. On the floor, fashion magazines fanned out, their glossy pages dog-eared and annotated with just a spiky, determined handwriting. Investment piece, she had scrawled next to a ridiculously impractical trench coat. Check cost per wear, she noted beside a pair of jewel-encrusted heels. This was how she justified it all. She wasn't a shopaholic. She was a curator, an investor in the brand of her. She picked up her phone, the cool, smooth weight of it, a familiar comfort in her palm. She swiped to Instagram, her thumb instinctively moving to the Create Story button. She fluffed her hair, angled her chin to catch the soft lamplight, and pursed her lips into a knowing, confidential smile. The champagne flute was carefully positioned in the frame. She pressed record. "Hey guys," she began, her voice a breathy, intimate purr, the one she reserved for her followers. "Happy Thanksgiving. I hope you all had an amazing day filled with so much gratitude." She paused, letting the word hang in the air. And now, she leaned a little closer to the camera, her eyes twinkling. It's time to show some gratitude to ourselves. Because self-care is the most important thing, right? Get ready for the biggest shopping day of the year. She took a delicate sip of champagne. "I've had my eye on this Saint Laurent bag for months now," she confided, as if sharing a deeply personal secret with a million of her closest friends. "And listen, I know what some people think, but a classic bag like this isn't an expense. It's an investment piece. It holds its value. That's my little tip for y'all. Plan ahead, know what you want, and don't be afraid to invest in yourself. You have to believe that you're worth it." She blew a kiss at the camera, a perfect, soundless smooch, and posted the story. Instantly, the validation began to pour in. A cascade of flame emojis, heart-eyed faces, and breathless comments. "Yes, queen, get that bag. You're my shopping inspiration." So true. Investing in yourself is key. Each notification was a tiny hit of dopamine, a reaffirmation of her identity. She was not just a consumer. She was a guide, a tastemaker, an expert in the art of living beautifully. Her phone buzzed in her hand, but this time it was a call, not a notification. The name on the screen broke the spell. Dad. A small, involuntary sigh of irritation escaped her lips. She let it ring twice, a petty assertion of her own importance, before swiping to answer. Her voice, which had been warm and engaging for her followers, shifted instantly to a tone of brittle impatience. "Hey, Dad, Jessa. Hi, darling. I just called to wish you a happy Thanksgiving." Robert's voice was calm and steady, as always. It was a tone that used to feel like a warm blanket when she was a child, and now felt like a damp, heavy wool sweater. "Thanks, Dad." "You too," she said, her eyes still flicking across the net, a Porter New Arrivals page. A particularly striking pair of boots had caught her eye. "I'm actually a little busy right now, just getting ready for tomorrow." "Ah, Black Friday," he said. She could almost hear the weary resignation in his voice, the gentle, uncomprehending shake of his head. "Are you planning on shopping a lot?" Jessa laughed, a genuine, slightly condescending sound. "Of course. That's how smart people shop, Dad. You get things for, like, 50% off. When you think about it, it literally saves money in the long run." It's strategic. She couldn't resist a small jab. You should try it sometime instead of wearing those same old sweaters all the time. There was a silence on the other end of the line, a beat that was just a fraction of a second too long. It was a silence that should have warned her, but she was too absorbed in her own world to notice. When he spoke again, his voice was unchanged, still maddeningly calm. You should be careful with your spending, Jessa. A dramatic, theatrical sigh escaped her lips. A performance for an audience of one. Dad, please, don't worry, she said, her voice dripping with the patronizing tone she used when explaining technology to him. I know what I'm doing. I have spreadsheets. I track everything. I'm not like you. I understand money. She didn't wait for a response, eager to end the call and get back to her planning. Gotta go. The best stuff sells out fast. Love you. Bye. She hung up, a lingering flicker of annoyance quickly dissolving into the electric thrill of anticipation. Poor Dad. He just didn't get it. He lived in his small, quiet world of numbers and balanced ledgers, a world of sensible shoes and practical sedans. He didn't understand the art of the brand, the power of the image, the complex financial ecosystem of desire and acquisition she navigated so expertly. She turned her full attention back to the laptop, her fingers flying across the trackpad. She created a meticulous battle plan in a color-coded spreadsheet, a route through Saks, starting with handbags on the ground floor, then shoes on 8, then contemporary on 5. She had floor plans memorized, sale associate names noted. She finally pushed the laptop away, her shopping carts full, her strategy set. She curled up on the velvet sofa, pulling the cashmere throw over her legs. Tomorrow was going to be a glorious, victorious day. She fell asleep to the gentle glow of the city lights, dreaming of the crisp rustle of tissue paper, the solid, satisfying weight of a new handbag, and the admiring glances of strangers, completely, blissfully unaware that 300 miles away, in a quiet study filled with books on finance and history, her father had just put a full and final stop to her list. He had logged into his account, his face illuminated by the cold blue light of the monitor, and with a single, steady click of the mouse, had confirmed the command, cancel card. Effective immediately. Saks Fifth Avenue on Black Friday was organized chaos, a Darwinian struggle set to the soundtrack of Mariah Carey's Christmas album. The air was thick with a cloying mix of 100 different perfumes and the faint, metallic scent of bargain hunting desperation. For Jessa, it was paradise. She moved through the throng with the predatory grace of a shark, her eyes scanning for prey. A cashmere sweater here, a pair of leather boots there. She was a warrior, and her arms were laden with spoils. By the time she approached the checkout counters, she was balancing a mountain of designer goods. The Saint Laurent bag that had been the star of her Instagram story, a Balenciaga hoodie for Tom, a cocktail dress she had no occasion for, and a small mountain of other assorted luxuries. She spotted a relatively short line and, with the casual entitlement of a VIP, simply glided to the front, cutting in front of a tired-looking woman who had been waiting patiently. The woman opened her mouth to protest, saw the sheer volume of Jessa's haul and the determined look in her eye, and simply sighed, slumping in defeat. Hurry up. I'm in a hurry, Jessa said to the cashier, not as a request, but as a command. She began piling her items onto the counter, a cascade of black and gold boxes. The cashier, a young woman with a name tag that read Maria and the exhausted eyes of a veteran of retail wars, began scanning the items. The total climbed to a number that would have made most people gasp. Jessa didn't flinch. She pulled out her black American Express card, the one co-signed by her father, and slid it into the machine with a flourish. Maria looked at her screen. I'm sorry, ma'am, she said, her voice flat. It's declined. Jessa smirked, a look of mild amusement on her face. No way, she said, waving a dismissive hand. Swipe it again. Your machine is broken. Maria dutifully ran the card again. Declined, she repeated, her expression unchanging. The people in line behind Jessa began to shift their weight, a low murmur rippling through the queue. Jessa's smile tightened. That's impossible, she snapped. That's a corporate card with no limit. The lie came easily, a well-worn reflex. Panic, cold and sharp, began to prick at the edges of her confidence. She fumbled in her wallet, her manicured fingers suddenly clumsy, and pulled out a different card, a high-limit Visa. "Here," she said, her voice a little too high. "Try this card, hurry." Maria took the card. The result was the same. "This card was also declined, ma'am." The murmuring in the line grew louder. Someone pulled out their phone. The screen's glow illuminating their face as they began to record. Jessa's face was flushed, a hot, creeping wave of shame rising from her chest. She could feel the social eye turning on her, dozens of strangers witnessing her perfect facade crack. "This is ridiculous," she said, her voice trembling. She frantically dug out another card, her last one. "There must be a network problem." As Maria took the final card, a man in the line behind her spoke, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. Probably a fake influencer, out of sponsorship money. The comment struck her like a slap. Jessa whirled around, her eyes wild. "Shut up!" she shrieked, her carefully constructed composure shattering completely. "This is just a technical problem. It's the bank's fault." The cashier slid the final card out of the machine. Her face was a mask of feigned sympathy. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice now carrying a distinct note of finality. "All of your cards have been declined." The world seemed to slow down. The noise of the store faded to a dull roar in Jessa's ears. The mountain of beautiful things on the counter, the bag, the dress, the shoes suddenly looked like a pile of accusations. They were props for a life she couldn't afford, a story that was no longer hers to tell. The whispers from the crowd, the unblinking eyes of the phone cameras, the pitying stare of the cashier, it was all a nightmare. As the store manager began to make his way over, followed by a uniformed security guard, Jessa stood there, paralyzed, surrounded by a pile of designer goods she couldn't pay for. She was no longer an influencer. She was no longer a woman of taste and means. She was just a woman falling apart in the middle of a department store. And she knew, with a sudden, gut-wrenching certainty, that this wasn't a system error. This wasn't a coincidence. This was a message. The opulent chaos of the sales floor was a world away. Jessa sat in a small windowless office in the bowels of Saks Fifth Avenue, a drab beige box that smelled faintly of stale coffee and industrial cleaner. The plush carpeting and glittering chandeliers had been replaced by scuffed linoleum and a single humming fluorescent light panel. A bored-looking security guard stood by the door. On the metal table in front of her, her American Express card lay like a piece of incriminating evidence. It was the ultimate humiliation, being relegated to the back rooms, treated not like a valued customer, but a common criminal. The shame was a physical thing, a hot, suffocating blanket. Her only lifeline was her phone. Her fingers, trembling with a mixture of rage and terror, stabbed at the screen, dialing the one number that had always been her emergency exit. Robert answered on the second ring. "Dad, you have to help me." The words tumbled out in a torrent of hysterical sobs. "They're keeping me here in some back room. They say I'm a scammer. My card isn't working. None of them are. You have to call them. You have to pay for it. 1V is." On the other end of the line, there was no panic, no fatherly concern, just a calm, chilling silence. When he finally spoke, his voice was as flat and cold as the metal table in front of her. "I can't pay, Jessa. The Amex card is frozen." "Then unfreeze it," she shrieked. "Tell them it's a mistake." "It's not a mistake," he said, his voice unwavering. "Why don't you use your Visa card?" The question caught her off guard. It was so logical, so simple, and it completely dismantled her frantic narrative. It doesn't work either," she stammered, the hysteria momentarily giving way to confusion. "None of them do," Robert stated, not as a question, but as a fact. "Is it because you're $75,000 in debt on one of those cards, Jessa, and nearly $60,000 on the other?" A deadly silence filled the small room. The only sound was the buzzing of the fluorescent light and Jessa's own ragged breathing. He knew. The secret, guarded so carefully, the financial house of cards she had built in the shadows, he knew all of it. "And then there's the personal loan," Robert continued, his voice relentless. "A verbal autopsy of her life. The $50,000 loan from that online lender. In total, you're hiding about $250,000 in debt. Isn't that right, Jessa?" A strangled gasp escaped her lips. It was a confession without words. The fight drained out of her, replaced by the hollow terror of being completely exposed. I was going to pay it back, she whispered, the tears now flowing from a place of pure despair. I have a plan, but right now you have to help me. They took my card. They won't give it back. They stole it from me. I fate. It was the last desperate act of a cornered animal. Blame someone else. Create a new crime to cover the old one. Stealing? Robert's voice changed. The coldness was still there, but it was now sharpened to a razor's edge. That's a very serious accusation, Jessa. If you believe a crime has occurred, then we need to involve the proper authorities. We need to call the police to clarify the situation. Let me help you. I'll call them for you right now. The world tilted on its axis. This was not how it was supposed to go. He was supposed to fix it. He was supposed to sweep in with his money and his influence and make the bad things go away. He was not supposed to make them worse. No, Dad, don't! Jessa screamed into the phone, her voice raw with a new, more profound horror. But it was too late. On the other end of the line, she could hear her father speaking in a completely different voice. A tone of calm, civic duty that was more terrifying than any anger. 911. What's your emergency? Her own name, her location, the word theft, the sounds came through the receiver, detached and surreal. Jessa's phone slipped from her nerveless fingers and clattered onto the table. Somewhere in the distance, beyond the muffled sounds of the store, a siren began to wail, a lonely, piercing sound that seemed to be getting closer. The siren grew from a distant cry to an insistent, pulsing wail that seemed to seep through the very walls of the drab office. The bored security guard straightened up, and the store manager, who had been hovering anxiously, ran a hand through his thinning hair. A moment later, the door opened, and two NYPD officers stepped inside. They were a man and a woman, their faces etched with the weary professionalism of people who had seen it all, especially on Black Friday. They filled the small room with the undeniable weight of authority. The policewoman, her name tag reading Diaz, addressed the store manager first, then turned her calm, assessing gaze on Jessa. Her voice was a monotone, devoid of emotion or judgment. Ma'am, we received a call from Mr. Robert Miller, reporting that you were the victim of a theft here. Please tell us exactly what happened. Actually, Jessa looked from Officer Diaz's impassive face to the store manager's nervous one, and then to the male officer, Chen, who had already taken out a small notebook and a pen. The script she had been running in her head, the hysterical victim, the wronged customer, evaporated under their steady, official scrutiny. These were not fans she could charm or service staff she could intimidate. This was the law. I think, she began, her voice a reedy whisper. She swallowed, trying to find her footing on the crumbling ground of her reality. Maybe there was a misunderstanding. My card is not working. Officer Chen's pen scratched against the paper. So there was no theft? He asked, looking up at her, his expression unreadable. Are you sure, ma'am? Making a false report to the police is a misdemeanor. The word hung in the air. Crime. Her father had not called the police to save her. He had called them to corner her. He had used her own foolish, desperate lie as a trigger for a trap, and she had walked right into it. There was no way out. Lying to them would be an actual offense, a charge, a record. Admitting the truth would be the final, official surrender. She deflated the last of the fight, leaving her in a rush. She looked down at her hands, unable to meet their eyes. Yes, she said, her voice barely audible. There was no theft, just a misunderstanding. Over my pressure. The officers exchanged a brief, tired glance. This was just another piece of Black Friday nonsense for them to clean up. Officer Diaz spoke into her radio, her voice a clipped string of codes and jargon. Officer Chen scribbled a few final notes, tore a page from his notebook, and handed it to the manager. It was over in less than 5 minutes. They hadn't raised their voices. They hadn't accused her of anything. They had simply held up a mirror of official truth, and she had been forced to look. When she was released, Jessa walked out of the store, not with the glossy black shopping bags she had envisioned, but with a flimsy carbon copy of a police report stating that incident number 784B was unfounded. The crowds had thinned, but she could still feel the phantom sensation of 100 phone cameras on her, the echoes of their whispers. She stepped out onto the cold Fifth Avenue sidewalk. The festive lights of the city, a cruel mockery of her own personal darkness. Her phone, which she had silenced in the office, had been vibrating non-stop in her purse. She pulled it out. The screen lit up with a blinding storm of notifications. It wasn't just a few messages, it was a digital avalanche. At the top of her Instagram feed was a video reposted by a dozen gossip accounts. The thumbnail was her own face, twisted in a mask of rage, screaming at the checkout counter. The caption on one of them read, "Influencer at Jessa Style has meltdown at Saks after cars decline. Number Black Friday fail." She clicked on it, a kind of morbid curiosity compelling her. She watched her own public disintegration in grainy, shaky footage. The comment section was a torrent of digital vitriol. Haha, is her personal brand financed by debt? This is why I never trust these fake people. All style, no substance. So satisfying to see this happen, TBH. A red notification banner popped up at the top of her screen. At Jessa Style, 12,478 people have unfollowed you in the last hour. The number was a punch to the gut. Each unfollow was a person turning their back, a digital door slamming in her face. Her virtual castle, the meticulously constructed cathedral of her image, was burning to the ground in real time, and all she could do was stand on a cold sidewalk and watch. I bet 99% of you will hear this, sigh, and scroll past without clicking like or subscribe. Even if it only takes a second. What time is it for you? And where are you listening? The penthouse, once a stage for a glittering life, had become a mausoleum. Jessa existed within its walls not as an inhabitant, but as a ghost haunting the scene of a recent death, the death of her own identity. She had been hiding for 3 days, a self-imposed exile in the prison of her own making. The curtains remained drawn, casting the vast, minimalist space in the perpetual twilight. The silence was absolute, a heavy, suffocating presence broken only by the electronic hum of appliances that continued to function even though she had ceased to. Her phone, lying face down on the cold marble of the coffee table, was a dormant beast. It would occasionally vibrate with the death throes of her social media life. A venomous comment, a news alert with her name in the headline, and each buzz sent a jolt of pure dread through her system. Tom was gone. His departure had been so swift, so surgically cruel, that it barely felt real. But the empty space in the closet, the void on the nightstand where his watch used to be, was undeniable proof of his absence. She was alone. Utterly, foundationally alone. The shame from the Saks incident had been a hot, public fire. This new feeling was a cold, private emptiness. Late in the afternoon on the third day, the phone began to ring. It wasn't the frantic buzz of a notification, but a persistent, determined ringtone. The screen lit up with a name she hadn't seen in months. A name that belonged to another lifetime, a life of family holidays and feigned politeness. Aunt Susan. Her mother's younger sister, the sharp one, the lawyer, the one whose gaze always seemed to see a little too much. Jessa's first instinct was to silence it, to let the call die like everything else in her life. But a desperate, primal flicker of connection to her mother, to a past that felt purer, made her reach out with a trembling hand and swipe to answer. She put the phone to her ear, steeling herself for a wave of cloying pity or a lecture dripping with "I told you so." She got neither. "I saw the video," Susan said. Her voice was as crisp and unyielding as a legal document. There was no preamble, no gentle inquiry, just a flat, brutal statement of fact. "It's horrific." The bluntness of it caught Jessa off guard. A fresh wave of hot tears, the kind born of pure self-pity, welled in her eyes. "Are you calling just to tell me how awful I am?" She choked out, the words thick and childish. "To insult me?" "No," Susan replied, and the coldness in her voice intensified, becoming something sharp and purposeful. "I'm calling to tell you the truth. The truth your father has loved you too much, and frankly, respected your mother's memory too much, to ever burden you with." There was a beat of silence, and Jessa could almost feel her aunt gathering her thoughts, preparing to demolish the very foundations of her world. "Where do you think all that money came from, Jessa? For all these years? Did you really believe in the fairy tale of some vague trust fund that magically refilled itself every month? Jessa's mind fumbled for a response, but none came. She had never questioned it. It was simply a fact of her life, like the sun rising in the east. That money, Susan continued, her voice a relentless, steady scalpel, came from the investment portfolio. Your mother, Laura, spent her life building. Do you understand? This wasn't some passive inheritance. She started with a small sum your grandmother left her, a few $1,000s, and she taught herself. While you were at ballet practice, she was at the library reading prospectuses. While you were at summer camp, she was on the phone with brokers, her nose spread all over the kitchen table. She had a gift, a brilliant, intuitive mind for the market, and she turned that tiny seed into a substantial nest egg. It was her passion, her secret masterpiece. The image was so alien, it felt like fiction. Her mother, whom she remembered for her soft hands and gentle laugh, as a master of finance? After she died, Susan's voice hardened. Your father, that boring accountant you've always treated with such condescending pity, he didn't just put that money in a savings account to be safe. He took on her life's work. He made a promise to her on her deathbed that he would not only protect what she had built, but that he would continue her work, that he would make it grow for you. He became its champion. But Dad always said he wasn't good at investing, Jessa stammered, the words feeling foolish as soon as they left her mouth. He said he was just a numbers guy, that he liked things safe. A short, bitter laugh crackled through the phone. That's because he's humble, Jessa, a quality you wouldn't recognize if it sat down next to you. He was being modest to you because he never wanted you to see him as just a source of money. But with her portfolio, he wasn't just a numbers guy. He became a student of his wife's genius. He studied her notes, her strategies. He read all her books. He learned to think like her. He turned the $500,000 your mother left into nearly $10 million. I was a fay. The number hung in the air, vast and incomprehensible. $10 million. Jessa sank to the floor, the phone still pressed to her ear. The room seemed to tilt. I tried to talk to him over the years, Susan said, a note of old frustration in her voice. I told him you were reckless, that you were taking it for granted. He wouldn't listen. He'd just say, it's what Laura would have wanted. I promised her Jessa would have a good life. But you didn't just have a good life, did you? You had a fantasy. And you, my dear niece, you have managed to burn through almost half of that legacy, half of your mother's life's work, on handbags and penthouses, and the husband who has now, I see, wisely abandoned ship. The shame was a physical force, a crushing weight on her chest that made it hard to breathe. This wasn't the fleeting humiliation of being caught in a lie. This was the profound, permanent shame of sacrilege. That Christmas dinner. Susan's voice was now low, almost a whisper, but it was the most devastating blow of all. When you sat there in your designer dress in that apartment he pays for, and you let him sit at the end of the table like a forgotten relative. When you looked him in the eye and threw his own wife's words back in his face, experiences over things as an excuse for your obscene greed, you didn't just ignore your father, Jessa. You spat on your mother's legacy. The call ended. Jessa didn't know who hung up first. She sat in the echoing silence of her apartment, the phone having slipped from her hand. The portrait of her father that had hung in her mind for years, a simple, boring, financially timid man who didn't understand her world, shattered into a million pieces. In its place rose a terrifying monumental image. A quiet giant, a secret genius, a man who had single-handedly held up the entire glittering world she had so carelessly inhabited, all in the name of a promise to his dead wife. This truth, stark and irrefutable, weighed more heavily on her soul than any $250,000 debt ever could. It was a debt of a different kind, one she had no idea how she could ever begin to repay. For 2 days, the penthouse was a tomb. Jessa existed in a gray, timeless limbo, the heavy velvet curtains drawn against a world she was no longer a part of. The silence was a physical entity, broken only by the hum of the sub-zero refrigerator and the distant mocking wail of city sirens. The aftermath of her life lay scattered around her. A single jewel-toned heel lying on its side on the polished concrete floor. A cashmere throw once artfully draped, now crumpled on the sofa where she'd slept. Takeout containers from a meal she couldn't remember eating, their contents congealing on the marble island. It was the detritus of a life that had suddenly, violently stopped. Tom had sealed himself in his home office, the frosted glass door an impenetrable barrier. His silence was louder than any argument. It was a cold, calculating silence, and she knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that he wasn't grieving with her. He was strategizing. He was assessing the damage to his own brand, calculating the blast radius of her social implosion. The call from her Aunt Susan had been a brutal, necessary surgery, excising the tumor of self-pity and leaving the clean, aching wound of truth. The knowledge of her father's quiet sacrifice and her mother's stolen legacy had recalibrated her soul. Shame, for the first time, was not about her public image, but about her private character. It was a deeper, more permanent stain, and with it came a fragile, unfamiliar flicker of resolve. She couldn't undo what she had done, but she could stop the bleeding. She had to start with Tom. The lie had been theirs together. The truth had to be as well. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, she pushed herself up from the sofa. She walked to the frosted glass door and knocked, the sound unnaturally loud in the oppressive quiet. "Tom, can we please talk?" He emerged a moment later, not rumpled from 2 days of hiding, but impeccably dressed in dark jeans and a crisp button-down shirt. His hair was perfect. He looked like he was about to step out for a meeting, not emerge from the wreckage of their shared life. The contrast between his composure and her own dishevelment was a physical blow. "I have a call in 10 minutes, he said. His tone clipped, avoiding her eyes. "This won't take long," she said, her voice steadier than she expected. "Tom, I know everything. I spoke to my aunt. The money, it wasn't a trust fund. It was my mother's legacy. My dad has been funding this entire life. We were wrong, Tom. The way we've been living, the things we've valued, it was all a lie." She watched his face for a flicker of remorse, of shared responsibility. She saw nothing but a tightening around his jaw. She pressed on, the words tumbling out. A desperate proposal for a future she wasn't even sure was possible. "We have to fix this. I mean it. We can sell the apartment. We have to. We can sell the cars, the watches, all of it. We can use the equity to pay back the credit cards, the loan, to pay back my father. We can get a small place, a real place. I can get a job. I'll do anything. It won't be like this, but it could be real." He was silent for a long moment, letting her vision of a humble, honest future hang in the air between them. Then, a slow, cruel smirk spread across his lips. It was a smile she had never seen before, and it turned his handsome face into something ugly and foreign. "We," he repeated, the single word dripping with a contempt that was almost theatrical. "Oh, Jessa, there's no we in this. There's you, and there's your spectacular 5-alarm fire of a problem. Do you have any idea what you've done?" She recoiled as if he had struck her. "What I've done?" "Yes, you," he said, taking a step closer, his voice dropping to a low, vicious hiss. "I tied my brand to yours. We were a power couple. Aspirational. I thought I was marrying a savvy, independent woman with a bottomless family trust. Turns out I just married the overdrawn daughter of a human ATM machine. And now, the machine is out of cash." It was then that she saw it, tucked discreetly by the front door, a sleek, black Rimowa suitcase. It was packed, the sight of it so solid, so prepared, so final sucked the air from her lungs. This wasn't a spontaneous argument. This was a calculated exit strategy. "You've become a liability, Jessa," he continued, his words a clinical assessment of her worth, a viral laughingstock. "My investors, my partners, they see those videos of you screaming in sacks. They see the memes, they see the comments. My dream requires capital and a pristine image. It does not require $250,000 in secret debt and a wife who is the digital equivalent of a dumpster fire." He walked past her, his movements fluid and unhurried. He picked up the suitcase, the wheels clicking softly on the polished hardwood floor. He didn't look at her, speaking to the air as if she were already a memory. "I have spent years building my brand, my reputation. I will not let you drag it down into the gutter with you. He paused at the door, his hand on the handle, and finally turned to face her. The coldness in his eyes was absolute. When you sort this out, and I mean really sort it out when your father decides to turn the money spigot back on, you have my number. Give me a call. Until then, I have a brand to protect. The door opened and then closed, the latch clicking into place with a definitive snap. The silence that rushed back in was different. The oppressive weight of his judgment, the constant, low-grade hum of his ambition, the suffocating need for her to perform her role as the perfect, wealthy wife, it was all gone. Jessa stood alone in the center of the vast, empty room, surrounded by the expensive props of a play whose leading man had just walked off the stage. She didn't cry. A strange, hollow calm washed over her. The ship was sinking, and the first and biggest rat had just fled. The mess was still hers, a terrifying, mountainous wreck. But now, at least, she only had herself to save. She woke to the pale, indifferent light of a new day, filtering through the gaps in the curtains. For the first time since the instant at Saks, she hadn't slept on the sofa. She had slept in the master bedroom, in the dead center of the king-size bed, and it had been a deep, dreamless sleep of pure emotional and physical exhaustion. The apartment was utterly still. Tom's absence had a tangible presence. The silence was no longer heavy with unspoken tension, but clean and vast and empty. It was the silence of a blank page. She didn't reach for her phone. The phantom limb of her social media addiction twitched, the muscle memory urging her to scroll, to check, to see the latest wave of commentary on her own demise. For the first time, she ignored it. Instead, she pushed herself out of bed, walked into the kitchen, and methodically, deliberately, made a pot of coffee. With a steaming mug in her hand, she began the archaeological dig of her own denial. She opened the drawers of the ornate Biedermeier desk in the corner, a piece she'd bought at auction because it told a story. Inside, stuffed beneath pristine stationery and old invitations, was a sheaf of unopened envelopes. She pulled them out, her heart hammering against her ribs. She went to her closet, to a Chanel shoebox on the top shelf where she'd hidden the angriest-looking letters. She gathered them all and laid them out on the vast marble kitchen island like a losing hand of cards. Visa, American Express. The secret ones, a notice from the online lender. Its bright red final notice a cartoonish screen. For an hour, she did nothing but open them, using a sterling silver letter opener, the irony of which was not lost on her. She smoothed out the crumpled papers and, with a pen from a Tiffany box, began to write down the numbers on a clean sheet of paper. The numbers swam before her eyes, abstract and impossible. She added them up once, then twice. The final sum was a black hole on the page, a figure so monstrous it seemed to belong to a corporation, not a person. It was a price tag of her fantasy life. Staring at the number, she felt not panic, but a strange, cold clarity. This was real. This was a monster under the bed, now dragged out into the daylight. There was only one thing to do. She took a deep, shuddering breath, picked up her phone, and dialed the first 1 to 800 number on the list. The hold music was a teeny, synthesized version of a Vivaldi concerto. When the man's bored voice finally came on the line, Jessa's own voice was a tremulous whisper. "Hello," she managed. "My name is Jessica Miller. I'm calling about account number." She read the long string of digits from the paper, her voice cracking on the last two. "I know I'm past due. I can't pay the full balance right now." She braced herself for the scripted lecture, the thinly veiled threat. "But I would like to work out a payment plan. I can pay $200 a month to start." The man on the other end was unimpressed. He spoke of interest rates, penalties, and legal action. The old Jessa would have become hysterical or imperious, or both. The new Jessa just listened. "I understand," she said quietly when he was finished. "200 is what I can do right now. It's all I can do." The call ended 20 minutes later with a tentative agreement for a temporary hardship plan. It was a tiny, insignificant victory, but it felt monumental. She hung up and, before the feeling could fade, immediately dialed the next number. This call was harder. The representative from the high-interest lender was aggressive, his questions sharp and accusatory. He used her full name repeatedly, a classic intimidation tactic. Jessica Miller, you do understand you signed a legally binding contract? Jessica Miller, we have options at our disposal to collect this debt. She felt the flush of her old defensive anger but swallowed it down. I am not refusing to pay, she said, her voice trembling but firm. I am telling you what I am able to pay. She spent the entire afternoon on the phone. With each call, a small piece of the crushing weight on her chest seemed to lift. It was excruciating, humbling work. She was laying the entirety of her failure bare to a succession of strangers, but with each conversation, she was also taking back a sliver of control. As the sun began to set, casting long, dramatic shadows across the empty apartment, she knew there was one last thing to do. She propped her phone against the coffee mug on the island. She didn't check her hair or her angle. She pressed record. She wore no makeup. Her skin was pale, her eyes puffy. A plain gray t-shirt hung on her frame. Behind her, the wall was blank. Hello, everyone, she began, her voice quiet, stripped of its usual confident cadence. This is probably the last time you'll see me on here. The life you've seen, my life, most of it was a lie. I lived a life I couldn't afford, financed by debt and deceit. I lied to the people who loved me, and I lied to all of you. But mostly, I lied to myself. She looked directly into the lens, her gaze unwavering. The video you all saw from Saks, that was the truth. That was what was underneath all the filters and the brand sponsorships. I'm broke, I am deeply in debt, and I am just now beginning the long, painful process of trying to fix it. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for promoting a lifestyle that was fake and toxic and unattainable, even for me. Her voice finally broke, and a single tear traced a path down her cheek. And most importantly, to my dad, who gave me everything and who I repaid with cruelty and disrespect. I'm so sorry. She ended the video. Without rewatching it, without a moment's hesitation, she posted it. Then she navigated to her profile settings. Her thumb hovered over the button, permanently delete account. She thought of the years of work, the hundreds of thousands of followers, the carefully constructed edifice of @Jessa style. It was a monument to a person who no longer existed. She pressed down. A final, stark question appeared. Are you sure? She was. After the final click, Jessa stared at her blank phone screen. For the first time in a decade, there were no likes, no comments, no DMs, no judgment. Just a quiet, reflective black mirror. Just silence. And in that vast, terrifying, and liberating silence, she knew exactly what she had to do next. She had to go home. I bet 99% of you will hear this, sigh, and scroll past without clicking like or subscribe. Even if it only takes a second. What time is it for you, and where are you listening? The train ride out of Manhattan was a journey in reverse, pulling her away from the glittering, hollow canyons of her adult life and back toward the quiet, tree-lined streets of her childhood. With every mile, the skyline shrank, and Jessa's anxiety grew. She clutched the handle of her single, small suitcase, a meager collection of essentials that felt more honest than the entire walk-in closet she had left behind. What will he say? Will he yell? Will he tell her with cold satisfaction, I told you so? She didn't know. She only knew that this was the one place left on Earth she could go. She wasn't coming for a bailout or rescue. She was a ship that had already sunk, and she was just swimming toward the only shore she knew. She walked from the station, the crisp autumn air a stark contrast to the stale, recycled air of her penthouse. The house looked exactly the same, a handsome, unassuming colonial that stood as a quiet testament to a life built on substance, not spectacle. It was a house of memories, of scraped knees, of her mother's laughter echoing from the kitchen. It was a place of truth. Her finger hovered over the doorbell for a full minute before she found the courage to press it. The familiar chime echoed inside, and a moment later, the door swung open. Robert stood there. He looked older than he had at Christmas, the lines around his eyes deeper. They simply looked at each other for a long, silent moment. She saw no anger in his gaze, no triumph. She saw only a profound, bone-deep weariness, and perhaps a flicker of something else, the cautious watchfulness of a man waiting to see if the storm has truly passed. All the speeches she had rehearsed in her head, all the elaborate apologies, evaporated. Her throat was tight, her eyes burning with unshed tears. "Dad," she whispered, the word a fragile thing. Can I stay for a while?" He didn't speak. He just held her gaze for another second, then gave a slow, deliberate nod. He stepped back from the door, holding it open, and let his daughter in. The first few days were studied in silence. It was not the angry, tense silence of their last few years, but a heavy, fragile silence, like a thin layer of ice over a deep lake. They moved around each other in the familiar spaces of the house, the ghosts of 1,000 unspoken words between them. Jessa stayed in her childhood bedroom, where the floral wallpaper was faded and a high school track and field trophy still sat on her bookshelf. She ate when Robert ate, simple meals of soup and toast. She washed her own plate. She expected a lecture, a confrontation, a list of terms and conditions for her stay. None came. Her father simply went about his quiet routine, reading his financial papers, paying his bills, existing. His silence wasn't a punishment. It was a space for her to simply be, to let the noise of her collapsed world finally die down. About a week after she arrived, she was in the kitchen, making a pot of coffee, when Robert walked in. The morning sun streamed through the window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. For a moment, she thought the confrontation was finally coming. Instead, she turned to him, clutching her mug. "I applied for a job," she said, her voice quiet but steady. "At the coffee shop down on Main Street. The manager said they need someone for the morning shift. It's just temporary, to start paying what I owe." Robert looked at her, then poured himself a cup of coffee. He stood beside her at the counter, and for a long moment she held her breath. He took a sip. "Okay," he said. And that was it. Just okay. An acknowledgement, an acceptance. They drank their coffee together, side by side, and the silence that settled between them was different. The ice had melted. It was a comfortable silence now, the kind shared by people who have nothing left to prove to one another. One Saturday morning a few weeks later, I was in my study, sorting through some old tax documents. The house was quiet. I looked out the window that overlooked the backyard, and I stopped. Jessa was in my late wife's garden. Laura had loved this garden, had spent hours tending her roses and hydrangeas. Since her death, I had kept it alive, but it had become unruly, a place of memory I couldn't quite bring myself to tame. Jessa was on her knees in the dirt, methodically pulling weeds from around the base of a rose bush, a chore she had despised with a fiery passion as a teenager. Her hair was tied back, her brow furrowed in concentration. There was a smudge of dirt on her cheek. She wasn't doing it for an audience. She wasn't performing. She was doing it because the weeds were there, and they needed to be pulled. She was tending to something, nurturing it, bringing order to a small, neglected corner of the world. I smiled, a real smile, for the first time in what felt like a very long time. The money, the penthouse, the lies, all of it felt distant, like a bad dream. Money could be lost and remade. But this was different. Integrity, once truly found, was priceless. My wife's true legacy wasn't the $10 million in her portfolio. It was the resilience she had passed down, a seed of strength that had been buried deep beneath years of carelessness. And now, finally, in the quiet morning light, it was beginning to grow. My daughter, at last, had found it.